Hello and welcome to Lights on Europe 2020 from beautiful Bali, Indonesia. Today I speak to Riza Sukman, who was born to parents coming from Bali and the United States. And he was also lucky enough that his love life brought him to Brussels, Belgium. So he's very capable in addressing the differences in the cultures and how we are addressing complicated questions in Europe versus the United States versus Indonesia and Asian culture. So Riza works as a yoga teacher, as a therapist, as a specialist in family constellations. So now that we are at the beginning of the year and many of us are going through, well, maybe now and maybe throughout the whole year, through many painful and vulnerable conversations about who we are and how the dynamics in our relationships are working, we are discussing how Brussels approach and how the European personal development space addresses these questions either in the same way or in a different way to how it's typically done in spaces like Bali, where everybody's high on the spirituality and maybe approaching the personal development in kind of different way. So listen to our conversation and maybe you will also gain a bit of strength in not creating so much pressure in always having the answers to questions that we are all seeking. Hi Riza, thanks for joining us on this interview. We are in the middle of beautiful Bali, where I'm having my New Year's holidays, and I was lucky enough to find somebody who's from Bali and at the same time had an experience with Brussels. So I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation a little bit about how these two worlds are separate or similar or not, and how actually the industry that you're involved with, how it compares from the one civilization, we can say, to the other. So thanks a lot for being willing to have this conversation, because I know that it's a pretty new situation for you.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your Brussels story. I know that you've been living there for about 5 years with your family. How was the experience for you coming from having lived in Bali your whole life? How was it for you transforming your life into a new space?
So for me, thinking about moving to Brussels was exciting because it's Europe, and I had been there before. After my high school graduation, my parents gave me a summer gift of going on a Euro trip, and so I had already seen Europe and Brussels once. But also I grew up with going to the United States every summer for 2 months because my mother is American and we would go and visit family there. So, and also having one American mother, I had the experience of understanding both, or at least from my own perceptions, East and West. So Brussels wasn't really necessarily like that different for me, and it wasn't that much of a shock. But even so, like, there were challenges, culturally, linguistically, like climate, geographically, and stuff like that.
You had to buy the first jacket, I assume?
Maybe first, like heavy. Well, not first. In the States, it's colder, actually. But yeah, something like that.
And so tell us how these 5 years went for you. You did a lot of training. You were exploring your future career paths as different alternatives of what you would like to go into based on what you've been studying and what you've been engaged with in Bali. So tell us a little bit so that we can put you in some kind of a box. We had conversations about us being frustrated about the world pushing us to have a box and always put labels on ourselves and being forced. For instance, in Brussels world, people often ask you, are you a lawyer or an economist? And you always have to have an answer. And the more experienced we are with the diversity of the labor market, we know that this is no longer working for people, and it's frustrating many of us to have these kind of labels. So if you were to put some kind of label on yourself, in which box would you put yourself as a professional?
Now, as you're speaking, I would say what's coming to me is alternative healing domain.
Okay, so talk to us about what it actually means. Alternative healing.
Alternative healing,
to what?
Yeah.
And healing of what?
So for me, alternative healing means like a holistic, all-encompassing approach that looks at the person as a whole, like including their emotions, their mind, their body, and their emotions, and also their energy. Like Chinese medicine talks a lot about energy. Like things like psychotherapy talk a lot about, they use talk, and talk relating with someone else can bring up stuff, memories, and blockages and things like this. But what they talk about more in Western therapy and things like this is tends to be more about a psychological or mental thing, whereas in Eastern medicine, it's more about energy. They don't really talk so much, or they don't really talk about emotion. But in the end, like, the body is containing emotion and energy. And you can even say that emotion is energy in motion. And people can have different blockages of energy or blockages of emotion that in the long term, if they're not addressed, it can cause physical ailments or illnesses or disease. So it's really like alternative healing is like something away from the mainstream allopathic medicine, which is looking into what's more the cause of the physical disease or illness.
And this is pretty much the dominant way of healing in the Eastern civilization, while it's very absent in the Western civilization. And I often come across stories of people looking for alternative healers when the Western medicine stops working for them, but it's not really known. Of course, it's very rarely reimbursed by the insurance system, so there's plenty of barriers for the people to actually have access to functional, different, alternative way of healing their body and mind. So do you see this as the next step of our healthcare system into which they eventually will have to develop into? Or are we really doomed as Western systems, and are we going to get stuck where we are, and whenever we need an alternative solution, we will have to continue traveling to Bali and elsewhere to seek these solutions?
No, I love this topic because I think we have to remember that even in the West, before the modern medicine was invented and kind of structured, in the essence, it's a man-made system that's working with the natural system of the body. And they kind of superimposed the modern medical system onto, like, in a sense, it's like imposing it onto the natural body's way of working, the body's natural way of working. It's a lot like dominating nature and trying to change nature to fix it or to make it better, and kind of not paying attention to what's already working in nature and why was nature made in a certain way by, if you will, a higher power or the universe. And even in the West, we can say that before this medical system was there were also these similar kind of healing modalities or indigenous modalities, even in early European societies, and all early societies had their own ways of healing. It's just that in the West, it's more known that in the East is where this alternative healing is. But actually, earlier the same thing was also.
So give us examples. What is it that we're talking about?
So like shamans, which like the whole witch hunts in Western Europe. If there wasn't this whole church thing, maybe actually these witches were the early European healers, if you will.
What else? Like now, concretely, if you have a disease, psychosomatic disease, how would you go about healing the disease differently?
Actually, the West, through connecting the East, from the inside is starting to bring in these this kind of alternative way of healing, and it's visible in things like somatic based trauma psychotherapy. In the United States, there's this thing called somatic experiencing. It's body-based psychotherapy.
What is it?
I mean, fundamentally, it is a client and a practitioner, and the practitioner is witnessing and holding the space for the client to pay attention, observe, and attend to his or her body-based sensations and anything that arises in the moment. And from this, you can start to see how the emotion or the energy flows through your system. You can also see what emotions come up, and each of these emotions signal something in either the healthy flow of energy or in a blockage. The shame is a good one that shows that there's kind of like an obstruction in the healthy flow of emotion. And from this, you can gauge and you can start to de-block the energy blocks, and you get to a place where you have decreased shame, you have decreased fear, you have decreased anger, and you're kind of just flowing in like a free flow of life energy, confidence, self-awareness, self-knowledge. And when you're speaking with people, you just feel like you're just a live human being who can function, you know.
And so this is very big, obviously, in the higher consciousness community, where everybody is like big on their self-care practices and tuning into actually feeling what's going on in their body and their minds. But how do you explain this to people who don't have any of these practices in their life, and they will tell you, I can't even meditate, and if I try, I get headaches. Yeah, how do you reconcile the two worlds? Because I guess for you, having been brought up in Bali, it's very natural to have these practices in your daily practice.
Yeah.
And for the society here, you're so tuned in with the rhythm of the nature, and I guess the communication is so much more open to what we're used to in Western society. So where do you start with the beginners? Like, how do you, when you were in Brussels, how would you have like really launched this practice with people who would have never come across this kind of reflection?
Well, the interesting thing is, despite some of my Buddhist meditation experience, which is clearly coming from a Buddhist background, stemming from Thailand, India, Myanmar, things like this, where I've really started to find a more kind of useful results was only when I started doing somatic experiencing, which is actually a method that was started by Peter Levine, who's an American guy.
What is it, somatic experience?
That's very much like what I just explained to you. It's a little bit difficult to explain because I'm not a practitioner, but of that specifically. But it's essentially like you're doing body-based meditation with another person observing you, and you also have the chance to express to that person what's happening inside of you while you're doing the meditation. So it's like meditation magnified for me. And things flow faster. It's like meditation on, I don't know, what do you say, meditation on steroids or something, yeah. And the thing about East and West is, actually, to be honest, I've learned a lot of great stuff from Western practitioners, actually, who are developing things that are very, very alternative. So it's not really black and white. Like, it's
not about being West and East, obviously. It's about being, I guess,
it's about being,
or tip of the iceberg kind of focused versus doing the holistic thing.
It's kind of like I can meet an American who's very open and transparent with how they're feeling, and you know, and they're conscious of their well-being and all that. And I can meet a Balinese who's very business oriented, only talking about money and economic success.
And so we've talked about how this translates into our health, but you've also looked into the relationships angle of this, and you've been trained in family constellations.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about where this energy work interplays with the quality of our relationships, first with ourselves and then within our families.
If we're healthier and happier and more comfortable with ourselves, it's gonna radiate out into our relationships, our relationships with colleagues at work, with family. It's gonna affect positively in a lot of areas of our life. Family constellations is a method that kind of also helps uncover where love has been blocked between people in families, in systems.
So it's a therapeutic methodology where you sit down with a family and you talk through the dynamics of the family?
Family constellations can be done in private, one-on-one, or it can be done in a group workshop setting where one person is the client and the other people in the circle, like from 10 to 20 people in the circle, are chosen as representatives for that person's family or system.
So it's a role play.
It's kind of like, it's not there's no role playing. The representatives are just embodying how they feel to be in that person's role, in the role of that person's family, and they intuitively feel their body language and where their body wants to move in space and how it relates with the other members.
Where is the added value of this compared to the traditional therapy that's being done when there's something not working well in the family dynamics?
It has an added value in that in real time you can see outside of yourself something that is going on in your family system in real time, and then there can be movements that are made that can deblock the issue, and when you see it being deblocked in real time, it's very your body is very sensitive to the movements that are happening, and it's like in your body, the body feels that there's a solution now that's possible, and you can like uncover deep, long lost love that you actually feel towards your mom or your dad that has been not present because of the conflict that's happening, for example. Things like this.
I don't want to oversimplify things again, but is there a difference to typical dynamics that you see in cultures like that of Bali versus what you've observed in the US or Europe, simply because we've been raised in different ways and we've been seeing different kinds of feeling dynamics in the families and the communities that we grow up in?
Yeah, well, in general, the collectivist societies,
which is the one of Bali?
The one in Bali, parts of different countries in South America, Africa, India, things like this. Even Spain is more collectivist than Holland, for example, or England. There's more of a stick together and help each other out kind of thing. And stick together, have the grandparents help take care of the grandchildren and things like this.
And so from the constellations perspective, whenever there is something not working within a family, is it not working in a different kind of way?
No, it's not working in the same
It's the same problem.
Yeah. Because then in that situation it comes down to the human level.
Because it's all the same fears of love being lost or of us not being lovable or not good enough in the dynamic, so it's ultimately the same source.
In the end, on a human organism level, like human body level, the Balinese person's heart is the same as an American person's heart, and they feel love just like an American feels love. They feel anger just like an American feels anger.
So why would Western society be so much less spiritual? Why is it so normal to have these kind of conversations in Bali, which seems so woohoo whenever you would raise them in Brussels, for instance?
It could be that it's just a removed environment.
Connection to it.
I don't think that necessarily Balinese people are more spiritual than Americans. I think there's also a lot of spiritual Americans or spiritual Europeans, but
it's not out there.
Bali is kind of like a global center where this kind of work is known to happen. And so when people come here, it's like they get to leave all of the socialization from where they live, and they can finally play out the part of themselves that can never be expressed when they're where they are living.
And so what's your experience? What happens to them when they come back home?
Maybe they miss having that part of themselves acknowledged.
Did you practice everything that you would have wanted when you were in Brussels? Like in your interactions with your friends and social circles, did you have the same quality of conversations that you would have here? Or is there a filter that you put on because you know that it's not the kind of talk that you have over there?
Well, it depends on the person I'm talking to, but yeah, in general there's a filter, because if I'm meeting someone in a coffee shop in the EU quarter, I sense their energy, and like if I talk to them after 15 minutes and I hear the stuff they're talking about, the things they mention, and if I mention one thing that's kind of along the lines of what I want to talk about, and they kind of look at me with their eyebrows going up, I'm not going to continue talking about it with them, because maybe their attention is completely elsewhere.
How is it in the yoga community? You are also a yoga teacher, so is it diluted in any way in the West, or is the intensity the same? That's also another thing that people would often mention, that you get, like, it's not as intense. Whatever you're getting out of these experiences when you're in Bali, you get less of it wherever you go.
It is kind of true, because in Bali it's acceptable that this is what you're here for. You're here.
So you play full out and you cry during your practice while you wouldn't when you're in Brussels. Is this kind of thing?
Not necessarily unsincerely, but because there's a common understanding that you are not just your professional self here. You are your holistic self who has feelings and who has an inner child somewhere inside, who has needs that it never got met, etc., etc. It's a very therapeutic way of understanding a human being. And because I guess that in that sense, people can drop the facade of their professional identity, and they can be a more multidimensional person.
How can we bring this into the corporate space?
I think
so we're no longer splitting the two identities.
I think all the people who are comfortable speaking about other stuff than just professional business as usual, you know, they can get together, they can identify who of their friends are like that, and then they can maybe all get together and maybe, you know, there's a tipping point where enough people are connected and in communication with each other that it becomes more of the norm, that it's acceptable. And then the people who are not comfortable can start to question, oh, there's a lot of people doing this. Maybe it's not so weird in the end. And these people look happier, healthier, you know, they're accepting themselves more. Maybe I should get out of my box and like see what's actually going on.
Is this something that you would recommend to the people now that we're at the beginning of the next decade? Is it like an intention that you would like people to go into their corporate space with?
Definitely. A lot of the problems people are having with dissatisfaction at work, depression, breakdowns and stuff like this is because their entire self is not accepted at work. And their human qualities, their imperfect human qualities. Yeah, a more emotionally aware workplace would be cool. And
how do you create that? What is the number one step that you would recommend the boss to focus on? How to start going there? You know, because you can't turn a typical corporate space into an emotionally aware workplace just like that. It's a huge organizational change that the systems have to go through, and unless you have a very aware leader on top, it's very difficult to get there very quickly. So
it's true. I mean, I think in the end it can help if the leader is open to these things and creates a conversation about it. But in the end, I think each individual within that organization or system needs to also be willing or curious to also be challenged and go there and do their own individual honest relating with their colleagues for it to really get more common.
What is your final piece of wisdom you would pass on from this beautiful space? I guess the number one is an invitation to Bali. And the second one?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think if people are honest and they dig inside and they feel themselves more, they know when they're not being honest. And I guess my number one thing would just be like, first start getting more honest with yourself, and then slowly try and start getting more honest with your friends first, like personal, or your family, and then your friends, and then once that's kind of been once the growing pains of that have been worked through.
The growing pains,
like
of being honest with
yourself, your family, and then your close friends, because it's already not easy. Then you can bring it into a wider circle of the world, and then from there, if more and more people do that, it's going to become much more comfortable for people to be honest, to be more authentic in all their interactions.
I guess good luck to all of us who are going to be trying any of this in our corporate space, because it's not easy, but I guess we know it's needed to be done.
But also, luckily, there's also books like Reinventing Organizations that already exist, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more on the way.
Yeah, Lalu is very popular in Brussels. I don't know to which degree it's known over here.
Yeah, with people who have a background in corporate and big organizations, it's known even here if they come.